Foster Care Nation, listen up. This is
Foster Care and Unparalleled Journey.
Strength for the powerless, courage for the fearful, hope and healing for wounded hearts. Hello and welcome back to Foster Care, an Unparalleled Journey with Jason.
And Amanda.
And today we have Karl Smith with us. Karl has a story about adoption. We talk a lot about foster care on here, but sometimes the people don't get to hear all the adoption stories. And there's a ton of adoption stories out there. With 500,000 kids in foster care, I don't actually have the numbers or how many kids are adopted on an annual basis, but that is a huge part of a lot of people's story. And
it definitely is, but it's also kind of controversial because some people, want to really celebrate it and shout it from the rooftops. Other people don't want to talk about it. Other people are like, "Oh, you shouldn't celebrate that because children have lost this." It's kind of all over the place.
It is a difficult and controversial topic. I've talked with quite a few people who have a very negative opinion on both foster care and adoption, and usually it comes back to an experience in their own life that they found troubling or traumatic or painful in some way or another. But today we wanted to have Karl on here because he has a daughter that they were able to adopt from China, and we wanted him to tell his story and invite you guys to listen in and see what you can learn from him. How are you doing today, Karl?
Doing great, Jason. Amanda, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. So my wife and I actually have a biological son. My wife and I got married rather late. I was 28. My wife was older. I'll leave it at that rather than start a range war over how old she was.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't get yourself in that trouble.
So we had a biological son, not without its tribulations. Ruthie was on a lot of fertility medication. We went through that cycle and had our son. And after, I would say, at least a handful of miscarriages, we finally had a heart-to-heart and said, we want to have a bigger family. We want to have at least 2 kids. My wife's an only child. Her mother was an only child. Her grandmother was an only child. So she wanted to have at least 2 kids. And I said, if there's one thing I can say with certainty, there's one thing the world doesn't need, it's more people. There's plenty of kids out there that need a home. So we started down the adoption process. And, a couple years and tens of thousands of dollars later, landed in China and brought my daughter back. And obviously she's been with us ever since. We got her when she was 15 months. And it's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride, to say the least.
It always is. It always is. How was that experience, going to China? And
it was, I can say this, I have no interest in going back. For sure. And this is, going back now 17 years or so ago. So it was a little bit of a different environment. But at the time, you were technically not allowed to bring any hard currency into China. And I was going over there with about $15,000 of American currency strapped to myself, as were all the other families who went with us. So it was a little unsettling. I had never been in an authoritarian country before, so you kind of get used to the way things run, and also, I think I come from a fairly diverse area, but it's a lot different when you are, when you are the absolute minority in the group. So we, the group of us were walking around, and a bunch of pasty-faced white people in a sea of Chinese people, and you stick out like a sore thumb, and you really realize you are the outsider. And the stress during the time in China was one of the worst parts about the whole process. During our last meeting with our adoption agency, we had a gentleman who had gone through it before, and Jason, I think you'll appreciate this. He was former military, and he looked at us. He said, "Look," he goes, "I'm talking to the guys here. You're on a mission. Get in there, get her out. That's your job." I was like, all right. And I didn't think much of it at the time. But the minute they hand this child to you, and I hold this girl for the first time, And all of a sudden I realized I am thousands of miles away from home. I got to get her out of here. And it's all I could think of is that somebody was going to come by in the next week or 2 weeks, 10 days that we were there and change their mind and say, I'm sorry, you have to go without her. So for, I didn't sleep much for a number of reasons because she was sick and everything else, but that weighed really heavily on me that somehow this was going to go sideways. And, it wasn't, you didn't have the U.S. legal system to back you up here. You were at the mercy of whatever the Chinese government decided at the time. So it was incredibly, incredibly stressful.
I can't imagine trying to go through customs and countries with cash strapped to you, because I mean, quite honestly, you could be looking for a child to adopt, or you could be looking for, a couple kilos of cocaine.
Yes. Exactly.
You don't know what they're going to think you're doing when you show up with that, if they see that money on you.
Right. Exactly. And that was, of course, the thing that's odd is they tell you, there are very specific rules, but then the adoption agencies, and here's the other thing, it's not just the amount of money. There has to be certain denominations, and it has to be new bills. So you're going into a bank and saying, okay, I need 3 envelopes of money, one with 5,000, one with 7,000, whatever, and saying they all need to be, $20 bills, and they all need to be new. So luckily we had a good relationship with our bank, but they're going through, and I'd see one with a wrinkle and say, no, we can't use that one, get another one. And so now you literally look like I don't know, Jason, maybe I'm not just going to buy drugs or something. I might be carrying in $20,000 of counterfeit money for all they know, because it's all freshly printed. So it was really unsettling. And then to come back in the United States and with this child, and you're hoping against hope when you show them the passport, the Chinese passport, that they're going to let you through let you in. So it was all the way along. Despite the fact that the agency prepares you, these meetings and all the paperwork, and they talk you through all of it, every step of the way, you're holding your breath and hoping that it works out okay.
It almost sounds like it makes you feel like you're a criminal. It
does. It really does. You do feel that way, and I don't think it's intentional, but it's just the way the process is set up. I will say, when we were looking at places to adopt from, we ended up in China, one, because they had a very clear procedure for it. Some of the other countries we looked at, it was, I don't want to say shady would be the wrong word, but it made me uncomfortable. You have to hire a lawyer down there, and then the lawyer negotiates. And I thought that doesn't sound good. The Chinese process is very clear. This is the paperwork you do. This is how long you wait. This is how it goes. So when we got there, there every couple of days there was another event we had to go to where they were stamping papers and checking things, and but it is it's unsettling. It's unsettling when you're constantly being hauled to these different places. And again, every time you went there, you see people with white lab coats. You think, that's it. They're taking her away. She's gone. I'm never going to see her again. And until we literally got home, literally in the house, it's the first time I think I exhaled for the entire trip.
I bet. That sounds like quite the experience trying to figure that out. Now this
trauma.
How long ago was that?
Well, Katie is 19 now, so it was about 17 and a half years ago.
So that would have been during China's one-child policy, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why she was up for adoption. So so you hear her story. She was found in a box wrapped in a jacket outside of a TV radio station in Wuhan City. And we come to understand that the police knew there were certain spots they could go and they would find the abandoned children. And this was one of them. She still had, we think her birthday, it's October 23rd, but there's no way to know for sure. They found her on the 26th with the umbilical cord still attached, and they guessed it was about 3 days. So it's a guess, right? And I didn't think much about it until we were in the Beijing airport coming back, and we ran into a Canadian who had been working the orphanages in China for about 10 years. And she said, it's just so nice to see these girls going on to a better life. And we said, oh yeah, it must be great. They're going to new homes and everything. She said, no, you don't understand. Most of them get killed because, it's one child. And if they get thrown in the river. The one river is called the Red River because that's where they drown the children, or they get left in a field. So what we tell Katie is somebody must have cared a great deal about you to take that step, because bear in mind, it is a capital offense to abandon a child. So somebody risked their life instead of taking yours to give you a chance at a better life. So, that was kind of a sobering moment. Really didn't think about it until we heard that whole thing. And then you're like, geez, that's, it really kind of put it in perspective. It's a tough situation. It was a really, really difficult situation. And here's the thing. We don't know if Katie was the first child and they said, oh, we have to have a son, or did they already have a child and she was an accident? We don't know. Was her birth greeted with joy? Was it greeted with sadness? Those are things we'll just, those are answers we're never going to get. And that has been a challenge. That's one of those things that she has to grapple with, that we can only help her so much with. That really is, that's some of her weight that she has to carry. And it's just a situation she was in.
And that's something that I think that really relates to both foster care and adoption situations oftentimes is, how have you dealt with that not knowing part? Because I know we've had kids, we have kids who have a deep desire to know. If you're here because you're interested in helping kids. If you'd like to become one of the helping heroes of foster care, but you can't take kids into your home, consider supporting our mission. You can do that over at buymeacoffee.com/fostercare. You don't need an account. All you have to do is go over there, click a couple buttons, and throw a couple dollars into the pot, and it will help us pay for all the expenses in producing this podcast. We are not sponsored by any company or group or anything like that. And if you'd like to join us on that mission, we'd be glad to have you. How have you dealt with that not knowing part? Because I know we've had kids, we have kids who have a deep desire to know, who want to know who they are, who their parents are, where they come from, and who aren't okay with just settling. And I don't blame them a bit, but they're not okay with settling for the pat answer that, your parents made some mistakes and that's just where it is. And it doesn't end there for them. They want to know something deeper, something more. They want to have that understanding of who they are and where they come from.
Absolutely. And so I had a job that involved a lot of international travel, and there was a above average chance I would end up in China at some point. And I promised Katie, if that happened, that I would take her with me. And she would not articulate this to you, but I think deep in her heart, she absolutely believed if she was walking down the street of this city of literally 5 million people, she would somehow stumble across her parents. And she would just know. And I think she always, she will always have a little part of her. She understands it here in her head. I think she understands the practical situation. But, let's face it, we all have that part of her heart that, there's always going to be a little gap there. And she's always going to want to know a little bit more than we can tell her. Ruthie had an incident once. Katie would go through these times where she would just be crying uncontrollably. I don't know if my birth parents are dead or they're alive or whatever. I don't even know what they look like. And Ruthie put her up on the vanity in the bathroom, and she's staring in the mirror. And it was like that scene out of The Lion King when Rafiki says, "Look harder." She said, "Look into the mirror." She says, "That's your mother. That's your father. That is who you are." And it helps. And, but you're right. There's always going to be that question. And, I think it's always going to be, what I tell people, anybody you meet, there's something that person's wrestling with, you're never going to understand. With Katie, we always know that's going to be one of the things we just will never truly understand. That's not where we're from. That's not the way we were raised. And it's neither better nor worse. It's just different. And you have to acknowledge that. And, just understand they have a right, and let them understand that. So this is a classic. Katie could have been more than a year or two, maybe 3 years old. And we're at some event, and, we're talking with some parents, and someone said to Ruthie, "Are you going to tell Katie she's adopted?" Now, we're both, basically blonde, blue-eyed, Caucasians, I'm like, if I have to tell someone she's adopted, they might have bigger problems to deal with than not knowing that. So, we've been very open about that. And that's something I'm sure, you guys probably deal with too, is people ask, they sometimes feel like they have to whisper, but we've been very open with Katie. She knows the whole story. She knows about the one child policy. She knows that we went over to get her, and she knows the whole story. And I think that's, at least in our case, that's worked out fairly well. That we've never had to try to cover anything up or and I think she just, frankly, I think she deserves the truth. And we've always tried to be upfront about that.
Yeah. I had a friend once who kind of leaned in and whispered to me, "Is he half black?" And I looked at him, and out loud, I just said, really serious. I said, "No, man, he's half white." And the guy didn't know how to take it. And I don't think he didn't mean anything by it. Right. He didn't have the verbiage in his head around it. It wasn't something he was familiar with or comfortable talking about. But race has always been an issue amongst humans for whatever reason. How has that played into you guys' experience with your daughter?
So the upside to it is we've tried to embrace the Chinese culture as much as we can, right? So we've done research with Katie. She's done class projects in China. We go down to Chinatown for Chinese New Year every year to celebrate that moment. That being said, a good example is when COVID-19 started hit, and it was being referred to as the Chinese virus. And Katie came home. She was a senior in high school, and just kind of matter-of-factly said, "Yeah, some kids won't sit at my lunch table now because I'm Chinese." And of course, we wanted to get upset as parents, and she just kind of waved her hand off and said, "Don't worry about it. That's just how some people are. So, you kind of get used to that." And she's aware of it. She knows, she obviously knows that she's Asian. But there have been times when I will say, we'll walk into places, because my son, I'd say for better or for worse, but for worse, looks a lot like me. So we'll walk into a restaurant, and there's, my wife, Caucasian blue eyes, and I'll walk in Caucasian blue eyes. There's my son, he's blondish blue eyes. And then there's our daughter. And you'll see people kind of, their heads will move, and they'll stop and look at Katie for an extra second and try to compute what's going on. I always figure if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm happy to talk to them about it. But if they have a problem, it really is their problem. It's not ours.
Yeah, that's always been our take on it. I know more so Amanda than I has dealt with that in the past, because I am just ambiguously brown enough that I can pass for just about anything. And so people don't give me trouble with any of my kids typically. That, and I think the fact that I kind of have a decent hate me face, and people don't come over and give me too much trouble if I feel like I'm in a place where I don't want to deal with them.
Right.
But Amanda's dealt with that, because a lot of the kids we've had come through our home and through the foster system, and some of the kids that we've adopted, are either black or mixed heritage, and they look different, and she is as white as you can be, I think, technically, legally speaking, without.
I'm a little pale.
Yeah, a little. Just a little. Her heritage is her maiden name is McClanahan. So It's not hard to figure out where she comes from, right?
I get it.
So when we have a young child who's black with her, that she's out with them, people will oftentimes take the time to really stare.
I've had a few comments and
Yep. Had a few people who had to be kind of put in their place. But that's always been something that I've seen foster parents and adoptive parents alike need to at least be conscious of, because we can't all pretend like it doesn't exist. It exists.
Right. I could not agree more. And, when we were just about done with the paperwork for Katie, we started to consider a third adoption. And frankly, we just didn't have the money at that point, because it was a pretty expensive process. At first, even when we were looking to adopt the first time, someone said, "Well, you're going to go to Russia probably, or and get blonde hair, blue eyed." And I said, "I already have one of those. It's time to get enough." We tell everybody with our kids, we made one and we bought one, and just like food and clothes, it's easier and cheaper to make your own. It's a bigger challenge to go out and go the other route. But I had said to Ruthie, I said, I think let's go somewhere else. Like, how about Guatemala, or how about Mexico, or something like that. Let's if we're going to do it there, I don't want there to be any doubt that people want to have that conversation. I was running digital media for a small media company when we were going through the process with Katie. So I documented the entire trip, and actually then converted that into a very small book. All those notes I took, because I think it's important to have those conversations. And to your point, especially the race thing, we've had people say, gee, couldn't you get a white kid? Couldn't you get a white child? And, I'm like, that really never came into mind. So this is something, Jason, I don't know if you guys have run into this, but I'll share a story with you. I would say we were about halfway through the paperwork with Katie, and we were still doing fertility. We had, Ruthie wanted to give it one more shot, which I said is fine. If we end up with 3 kids, we end up with 3. And she sit in the fertility clinic, and we were kind of progressing with Katie, and some of the other women were asking her, like, what's that like? How's it going? And they said, well, what's going to happen? And they said, Ruthie said, well, my husband's going to go. Ruthie stayed home, just to be clear. Like, Ruthie and Noah stayed home when it came time to get Katie. And I went with my mother-in-law and my stepmother to go get Katie. And Ruthie said, like, yeah, my husband's going to go get her. And some of the women started crying. And I said, why were they overwhelmed with it? They said, well, a couple of them said their husbands said, I won't raise a kid if they don't look like me. And I had to tell you, Jason, of all the stories I heard during the process, that was the one that absolutely stopped me. And maybe this is because I don't know, maybe I don't think enough, but that never occurred to me. Like, I never thought I couldn't love a child because they didn't look like me. Frankly, I'm sorry my son looks like me. I wish he had a better gene pool to draw from, but it is what it is.
I know the struggle.
Right. But that when Ruthie told me that story, I was really kind of stunned by it. But that is, to your point, some people think like that. They don't want it. It's not their. Frankly, I've had a number of people who have gotten remarried to someone of the same race, and they'll say that the stepchildren, well, they'll never really be my kids. And I don't, I grew up, my mother passed away when I was young, and my father got remarried. That's your family. So to me, that really was never a thing, but that is the kind of thing you deal with. And I've thought about those other husbands who said that to their wives, and part of me says, "Oh, I wish I could talk to them." But the other part of me thinks, if they feel that, if that's where their head is at, I don't think there's anything I could say to change their mind. And frankly, I would say it's just their loss, but it's not just their loss. There's a child out there, who missed an opportunity to family because somebody had those beliefs. And I think that's truly the tragedy.
I recently had a conversation with a guy that I work with, and it was amongst all the racial tensions happening in America and some of the conversations we're having. And he says to me, I don't think racism really exists anymore.
Oh, geez.
At which point I almost choked. And I think he was probably sorry for having mentioned that to me, because he got a conversation after that I didn't allow him to not believe that it exists anymore. And I explained to him, I'm like, look, dude, you're a blonde-haired, redheaded guy over here, right? Mm. You live in a rural place in the middle of Missouri. Of course, racism doesn't exist in your life. But let me tell you where I've seen it, because we're in the same rural area.
Right.
And people will make assumptions about who I am based on what I look like. And their assumptions are always wildly different, because I have been called every racial slur with hate and malice in the voice that you can imagine. And I've been told to go back to my own country a couple of times, actually, at this point now too, which I always laugh at, because the first guy who really pulled that one off with me was a guy who approached me right after I had gotten out of the military. Mm-hmm. I just left the military, and he's telling me to go back to my own country. I was young and full of piss and vinegar and all those great things. And yeah, fortunately he had the good sense to leave and not stay, because I think it would have probably turned out with me doing something stupid that would probably have impacted my life later on. but it exists. It just does. And it's something that I think we have to be conscious of and aware of, and have those conversations with the people around us that, man, there are just some people who are just mad at folks because they look different.
Well, so here, I'll take that a step further for you. Someone, when we got the pictures of Katie, when they connected us with her and said, "This is your girl," they looked at the pictures. It even hurts me to share this story, but they said, "Oh, she doesn't have those really slanty eyes. You should be happy about that." What do you say to something like that? I mean, but that was the view, was that she didn't look too Chinese. So maybe that was okay. That was better. And I having, grown up in kind of a multicultural town, or if you will, or in high school and college experience, I think anybody who says that the racism doesn't exist, or there's not even race is an issue, even if you want to call it racism, you're not paying attention. And, we've seen it enough with Katie, like I said, before she got here and after we got here. The majority of people, like, they embraced it. She's been treated by our family like anybody else, my side of the family and Ruthie's, as one of our own, because she is. But, she's going to have to deal with that. And I've told her, we've told her that numerous times, that that's something you're going to carry forward, because you'll always be Asian. There's nothing going to change that. And that's one of the things people always associate with you. You are Asian, and that's going to come with whatever stereotypes it comes with. So, to your point, when it comes up, I'm always happy to have a conversation about it. People ask me, well, why did you adopt internationally? Why didn't you adopt domestically? Look, I have nothing to hide, and it's total transparency. And if someone asks anything about Katie, I'm happy to have the conversation, because I think the only way we're going to we won't get past it in our lifetime, certainly, and maybe our kids' lifetime, but the only way we're going to start to do that is by having those kind of conversations. And to your point, and not having them end in a way that we do something we regret later on.
Yeah. Fortunately for me, in that moment, I had a little boy who was probably about 4 years old in the car with me, and he was just getting out. And as my mindset was shifting from healthy to unhealthy, I happened to glance down and see his face looking at me like he saw something was going sideways and something felt wrong. And it gave me the feedback I needed to go ahead and pull that back. But those are hard moments,
Yeah.
And so if you go back to the beginning, what made adoption seem like the right option for you guys? And I mean, international adoption as well, because I have heard so many people say, why do people adopt all these kids from other countries? There's so many kids here who need a home. And while I agree that is true, there are a lot of kids here in the States who need a home. That 100% true. But, Amanda and I had actually looked at international adoption before we started any of the foster care or adoption stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, it was cost prohibitive. We said, nope, ain't got the money for that right now. And so we ended up going down a different road. But as soon as we started looking at it, it was something we really felt called to do.
Mm-hmm.
And has that been part of your experience? Was there a calling there?
Yeah. Once we had the conversation that we had conversations before we even got married about having a family. We felt very strongly, again, because my wife comes from a line of only children, that she wanted to have the bigger family. Of course, I come from a bigger family, and I told her, it's not what you think. This is not father knows best, but she insisted. So, so again, a full transparency. Our senior pastor had adopted domestically and internationally at the time. And his wife said, with the domestic adoption, which was first, she said, every time someone knocked at the door, my heart was in my throat. They were coming to take him. They had changed their mind. And that really stuck with us, because, what I said was, I saw the trauma we went through with the miscarriages, and there were, I'm not kidding, 5 or 6 of them. And, when you go through a miscarriage, it's like losing a child. You are losing a child. And that's just too much trauma. I couldn't imagine putting us through that again, for an adoption kind of being pulled or rescinded, whatever you will. And I think we kind of got confirmation for that at one of our travel meetings with the agency. We were speaking with a young couple who had twice found a young lady who was pregnant and was willing to give their child up for adoption. And both times, they put the young lady up in an apartment. They paid for her medical care. They took care of her, took care of her, all her medical expenses and whatnot. And then once she gave birth, both times the young lady said, "I changed my mind." And what they said is, look, you can have any agreement signed you want. You can have it notarized and codified. But at the end of the day, most courts are going to look and say, nope, it's the mother, end of story. And they were like, look, the fact that we've sunk $60,000 in those 2 pregnancies isn't the half of it. It's the fact that we had the nursery ready and, baby showers and the name picked out, and we're imagining our first Christmas together, and both times the plug got pulled. And they said, I hate to say it, but they wanted to make sure it went smoothly, and it actually happened. And that's one of the reasons we landed on China, because we knew, for good or ill, the trains run on time in China. And when they say this is the process, all the research we showed said the process runs exactly as it is said it's going to run. And that was our experience. So once we kind of started to go down that road and did the research, and we felt, we didn't feel we could go through the trauma of it not working out. China, and to your point, that the cost is not, can't be ignored. It is a significant investment, if you will, expense, whatever you want to call it. In fact, that's why when we started looking at Guatemala, it took us about 2 years to get the paperwork done for Katie. And from the time we started the paperwork to the time we started looking into Guatemala, the price in Guatemala doubled.
Wow.
And yeah, so I just said, look, I think 2 is going to have to be it. And what I said is, this way we can play man-to-man defense. We don't have to switch to zone. It's 2-on-2, and we can control the situation a little bit. But yeah, so that's kind of how we went down that path. And I don't know how it would have gone if we had gone domestic or gone to the country, but I do know for our situation, and I think it's important to say everybody's situation is different. And I would say, your experience is the right experience. If you feel like once we really got knee deep into it, I felt more and more confident we had done the right thing. We had chosen the right path. And absolutely no regrets whatsoever. I would not say it's for everybody, just as I'm sure you would say, foster care is not for everybody. It's, certain people, it's the right fit. And for us, absolutely 100% the right choice.
Hey there, Foster Care Nation. If you'd like to find yourself in a group with like-minded people, head over to Facebook, and you can find us at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. We've got a group over there where we talk about foster care, we talk about adoption, and we talk about all the things related. If your podcast player allows it, you can also reach down and hit that subscribe button so you get notified every week when we put up uploads. Every Tuesday, a new episode comes out. We'd love to see you next week. Now back to the show. Yeah, I agree. And knowing what that right choice is for you and your family is really important, and not caring too awful much about what other people seem to think you should be doing is a valuable skill set to have.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's nobody knows your situation. They may know most of it, they may know some of it, but they don't know all of it. And I would never presume. I looked at, we had about 12 or 13 families in our group that went over to China. And one of the last things, it's kind of crazy, one of the last events you have in China, they put you in this massive room, and there must have been 250 people, which shows you what kind of an industry adoption was at the time. And I looked around and I thought, every single one of these people has a different story. They have a different reason for being here. They made their choice for their own personal reasons. And I'm sure, for all of them, it was they felt it was the right thing. So, I couldn't be worried about, I couldn't be worried about what other people were thinking. I knew what was right for my family, for my son, my daughter, and my wife. I knew that I just felt like we were doing the right thing. And, to your point, if someone doesn't like it, one, I'd love to have a conversation as to why you don't like it, but two, it isn't, you're liking or disliking it isn't going to have an impact on what's happening in our lives.
Absolutely. What's the saying I recently heard? Other people's opinion is none of your business. Someone else's opinion of you is none of your business. And
that's right.
I'd love to keep it that way.
Yep.
So you guys looked at this and you stepped right in and you got a kid from, who needed a home and brought her into your home and raised her as your own. What have been some of the significant struggles you've seen come through other than your typical, terrible twos have their moments and toddlers have their places and teenagers have their struggle points. But, with the added trauma of adoption, because, and I don't say that in a negative way, so to speak, as if like you're adding that trauma, but anytime a child is given up by someone or for whatever reason has to be pulled from their home, adoption leaves trauma in their brain. It's part of it. So what have you seen that manifest in you guys' experience as?
Yeah. So there's two answers to that. One is the physical part. Katie was really sick when we got her. And she was really petite, very small. And by the time she came home, within the first week or two, she had pneumonia. In fact, while we were there, she was running a fever. And if you think going to the doctor with your kids is traumatic, I want you to imagine going into here. I'll tell you, I have time for a story. Here's a story. So she's sick. I mean, sick. The doctor is with us, has done a couple things. She's getting worse. We had a friend, believe it or not, who was actually in Guangzhou at the time. He owned a restaurant near us, and he happened to be in there visiting family because we were there during the Chinese New Year. And he said, Karl goes, I'll take you to the hospital. Best in Guangzhou. Okay, great. We walk into this hospital, and the lobby looks like an old bank lobby, marble from floor to ceiling, 2 stories high. And there literally, it looks like a bank. There are tellers at the and there's Chinese letters above it, and that's for which department you want to go to. So each line is 15, 20 deep. John grabs me. He says, you have your passport? I'm like, yes, you never leave your passport when you're an American in China. He says, hold up your passport. I held up my passport and the Red Sea parted and everybody moved out of the way and I went right to the front. And the woman said, what's the problem? He's translating. They take us up to the pediatrics. And the first thing they do is they hand me the thermometer. I'm like, wait, you want me to take the temperature? Isn't there a trained medical professional who's better capable of doing this? But long story short, they end up giving us some antibiotics. And so it was rough. We get her home. A week or two later, she develops pneumonia. So that whole, the medical thing was a challenge from the jump. On the other side of it, getting her home with the emotional part, remember, in Chinese orphanages, they rarely hold the children. What they do is they'll put them in the crib and they'll throw the bottles in the crib and let them feed themselves. So a lot of the kids get bottle rot in their teeth because they're just, kids will keep the bottles in their mouth. Katie must have been held for some reason because she didn't seem to have that problem. But that being said, she wasn't held a lot. So of course I got her. And from the minute they handed her over to me, I wouldn't let her go. So I was holding on to her and I was like a crack dealer at that point. Like I was giving her hugs that she had not had for 15 months. So you talk about not wanting to be unattached. She was ferocious about that. In fact, one of our first nights home, I'm holding on to Katie on the couch and Noah comes over to see her. He leans his head on my shoulder as I'm holding her. Her eyes got wild. She shrieked and she lunged right at him and she just attacked him because I was hers, and that took, then when I went back to work and left Katie with her mother, Katie looked at her like, who are you? Where's the guy who's been hugging me for 2 weeks? So that took a while to get over. And Katie we've always been trying to be very cognizant of her concern about being abandoned, because that's a real thing. When we dropped Noah at Sunday school for the first time, he looked at us, he waved, walked away, went into Sunday school. With Katie, I had to go into Sunday school with her for 6 months and just sit in the room with her so she knew I was there and she could see me. So that was one of the many things that was different between raising the two of them. but she had some real issues with being abandoned and not being, the detachment type of thing. And that, I think that's been mitigated. Obviously, she's 19 now, so she's a young lady, but that's always been a thing, trying to, be cognizant of what is her reaction going to be if I'm away. When I was working, a couple of years ago, I was working where I was away from home for a couple of days a week. I'd go down on Mondays and come back on Fridays. And Katie was 12 or 14 at the time, but every week she would give me a different stuffed animal to take down with me. And I think that was part of that, part of that adoption thing about being separated from me. And I think that, so it's different, but it's still definitely a thing.
A lot of those stories about kids who aren't held very much in orphanages come back and are the kind of the impetus for cases of RAD. I don't know if you're familiar with RAD, reactive attachment disorder. It's something that happens in the brain of kids who don't learn how to have healthy attachment at the appropriate age. And it can turn a couple different ways, but it can turn really significant to the point of psychopathy, Wow. It can really damage kids because they never learn to make that healthy attachment. And it sounds like you may have, just from my little bit of knowledge about child psychology, it sounds like you may have caught her in some of the last moments of her ability to learn to build that true attachment, in that last year or so where she was able to build that and gave her that ability to create a healthy attachment. Yeah. And that, we made sure that we were spending a lot of time with her and then get her used to the idea that we could be away, but we would come back. And, you try to work through that. So one thing I probably should have mentioned, I mentioned like some of the kids don't make it, but some of the kids don't make it in the orphanages over there. And part of the reason is you'll have 2 or 3 kids in a crib. They'll throw all 3 bottles in there. And if one kid is bigger or stronger, they'll take the bottle away from the other kid. And that's why, like one of the workers said to us, somebody must have paid attention to Katie because she's so small. It's clear that if someone was bigger or stronger, they could have taken the bottle away from her. Someone must have taken the time to make sure she got fed, because kids literally starve to death in the orphanages because the other babies take their bottle away. So, and I can tell you so that's another thing that gets me to think of this. You asked about things we were dealing with. The first year or so she was home, she would gorge herself. She would fill her mouth so much with food. She was like a chipmunk. She literally couldn't get any more in. And then she would literally make herself sick because she would eat until she was sick to her stomach. And she was just because there just wasn't a lot of food, at the orphanage. So that's something we kind of had to get her to regulate. And she was really skinny. When we took her down to the children's hospital, when we first got her back, they said, look, we're going to give you a month, but if she doesn't come back with some weight gain, we're going to have to put her on a special feeding program, because she's clearly that far underweight. But she came to us with 4 teeth and like 4 tufts of hair. And once she started eating and getting vitamins, all of a sudden she had all of her teeth and all of her hair, like literally almost overnight. So, we were blessed that kind of took the right turn. Yeah, it sounds like you guys were there at the right moment, the right place and time. Have you seen, and you said she's what, 17, 18 years old now? 19. So how has that manifested as she went through the teen years? Because we've had a few teens, we have a few teens. We've seen a lot of teen stories, and teens are notoriously difficult to take care of because of all the struggles that go on in the brain in that age anyways, and the struggles with society and fitting in and all that. But when you add that extra layer of being adopted and then add on the fact that she came from a place where she wasn't maybe well taken care of or paid close attention to and had a lot of other traumas in that background, how have you seen that manifest in her life, or have you? Well, that's interesting. There's a couple of things I would say, factors that played into it. One was, her brother's 4 years older than her. So when she entered high school, he was off to the Naval Academy. So he was gone. So she kind of became the only child for the first time. So part of what she was wrestling with in her early teen years was her brother not being there. And she would never, freely admit it, but, she missed him.
And that was a factor. We were concerned about the whole how adoption being adopted might have an impact on relationships, especially looking for boyfriends and that, because we know that could really go in a lot of bad ways. But I will say she had one, I would say, as serious as you can be as a sophomore or junior in high school boyfriend. And, she's the one who broke it off because she said, you know what, this isn't working out for me. And she did it in a very healthy way. And I thought she just proved to me that she'd kind of matured and was able to handle that type of thing. I think having her brother kind of pave the way and see how he handled a lot of things gave her a playbook to go by. So things like peer pressure about drugs or drinking or sex or whatever, I think she had, I think she was getting some good counsel from her brother on that. And in fact, my wife loves to tell this story. Must have been beginning of her senior year. Some young man was having a conversation with her and said, hey, I think we should hang out. And she's like, oh, great. Maybe we could see a movie or something. He's like, oh, no, I was thinking more like friends with benefits type of thing where you come over, and she was like, no, I think I'll take a pass on that one. Well, she told her brother about that. And he came home and decided he would show up to the high school in full uniform and just pointed at the kid and said, are you so-and-so? Come with me. And went and had a little come to Jesus meeting with him to kind of tell him where the lines are being drawn. The fact that she's the one who did that, it would have been easy for her to kind of draw that line. Something else, Jason, I think that has nothing to do with her being adopted, but she never got on social media at all in high school. In fact, it really wasn't until late in her senior year she got on Instagram, mostly just so she could chat with some of her girlfriends from her gymnastics team. But she didn't get bogged down in Facebook or Snapchat, which was big at the time. She never got bogged down in any of that stuff. So I think in some ways, that was good. She's also, and I wish I could tell you where this came from. She's a very pragmatic thinker. She's not overly emotional when she thinks of things. She tends to think in a very linear fashion, and her brother does as well. And my son's take on relationships in high school was that there's too much drama. It's just not worth the time. I've got things I want to accomplish. And if I get bogged, because I see what my friends get involved with, it's not worth it. And I think Katie heard that and saw that, then saw it happening in her own peer group and said, you know what, he's right. This isn't worth it. So I think in some ways that, that kind of helped her steer clear a lot of the drama that I think other parents of teens have had to deal with.
Wow. I'll say that I learned a lot of things from my own sister, who was a couple years older than I was, but I mostly learned how she got caught, and I didn't do it that way anymore.
Right. Well, people have asked me, like, my sister was the notorious troublemaker when I was growing up, and someone said, like, why didn't you get in more trouble? I said, because I saw what she did, I saw what it caused, and thought, that's not worth it.
I wasn't that smart. I just what my sister did. I saw how she got caught, and I avoided those methodologies.
Right. Well, so this is about having the brother-sister relationship was really strong. And Katie saw, by the time Noah got to his junior year, he had started to put himself on a path to get to the Naval Academy, and he knew what that was going to take, and he knew it was at stake. So she watched him do that. And, by the time he got to his senior year and it became clear that this was really a possibility, he started to weigh things like, people getting a house for prom weekend, for example. And he would weigh, like, look, is it really worth me being caught with a bunch of underage drinkers when it could blow the whole shot at an academy? It's not. And so he made those kind of decisions. And she saw not just him do those things, but she also saw the thought process that he went through. And she started to put that in her own mind. By the time she got into those years, now bear in mind, she's watching her brother and she's seeing the tribulations he went through at the academy, but also the opportunities. That's when that military service became a goal of hers as well. So she saw what her brother was going through. She saw the opportunities, and she also knew what she would have to, I'll say, sacrifice, but avoid in her high school years to make that a real possibility. So again, because she's a linear thinker and very pragmatic, she's thinking, okay, I could go to this party where people are smoking and drinking, but when I'm in front of a congressional panel and they say, oh, for the nomination, and they say, oh, I see you were caught with a DUI or smoking cigarettes. How am I going to answer that? How am I going to clear myself of that? And she kind of put the long-term objective and used that as a filter for an awful lot of stuff that she did. And I think, in some ways that having her brother go through it and help her kind of see that as a possibility and eventually the path that she's on now, I think that really helped her avoid a lot of the pitfalls that the teenagers tend to run into.
So she's aiming for the military herself now?
She's at the Air Force Academy Prep School. And she received 3 nominations from there to go to the academy. So as long as, knock wood, she keeps her grades up and doesn't get herself in any trouble, she'll be part of the Air Force Academy class of 2025.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean,
so this is, people say your kids are different. Well, of course they are. Cause one's a boy, he's a blonde, blue-haired, blonde and blue-eyed boy who's our biological son, and then our Chinese daughter. But my son applied to the Naval Academy, applied to no other academies, did not apply to ROTC, wasn't interested. He said, if it's not the Naval Academy, I'm going to go play football somewhere. Katie said, I'll go to any academy that takes me, and if they don't take me, I'm going to go ROTC. Like, she was dead set on that. So she did the work, and so here, this is, I think, indicative of the type of thinker she is. She was not, to be honest, she wasn't like enamored with her Girl Scout experience. It was okay. She loved the project. So she got the Bronze Award and the Silver Award. And I think all things being equal, she probably would have bailed after doing her Silver Award project. But she said, I think getting the Gold Award puts me in a better position to get a nomination, a congressional nomination, potentially appointment to an academy. So she went through and did it. And because of where she wanted to be, she said, I want it to be for veterans. And she put in a lot of legwork. I see a lot of the projects kids do, which are fine, but you can tell it's something they knew somebody and they just went and did this project and they're done. Katie said, I want to help veterans. And the first couple of things she came up with were, well, you can put a plaque here or you can plant flowers here. And she said, that's not helping. There are too many homeless veterans out there. That's who I want to help. So long story short, she comes across a philanthropist here in Philadelphia who had bought the Veterans Comfort Home, and was in the process of refurbishing it to make it a transitional homeless shelter for female veterans. And Katie went down there, and Dana said, you can have the whole family room. And Katie said, I'm going to build a library. I'm going to build an activity center for these women. And she did. And that, so she was able to kind of tie her passion for the military, with, the Girl Scout Award, and really, and I think that would not have happened, frankly, if she didn't have that long-term goal in mind. And again, it all ties together because of where her brother was and what she saw her brother was on the path to achieve. I think that really helped her make a lot of those kind of smart decisions.
Well, that brings about 2 thoughts. The first one is, I just have to wonder how many boxes of Girl Scout cookies you did eat over the years. Because the ones with peanut butter are the best ones. Trust me, I know.
No argument there.
And second, I just find it really interesting that a girl who was a homeless girl who was found in a place of need has come full circle to being a girl who's helping homeless people who are in a place of need.
Jay, you hit it really. So Katie, one thing Katie did with the women at church is they did these blankets. I think they're called twist blankets, but they put together these blankets. And Katie did a bunch of them, but then she brought home some of the extra material. Mrs. Bernard said, sure, take it. And she made, half dozen, 8, 10 blankets. And what she would do is when she came home from gymnastics, she comes through Trenton, New Jersey on her way home from practice. There were always homeless people there because people had to stop. It was a very long traffic light. So she started making blessings bags just because, and she would put one of these blankets in them, and she would wait till the person would come up and she'd hand them the blanket. And I do think that's I think she has a spot in her heart for that. She knows where she came from. She knows one of the reasons that she is where she is because, somebody didn't have the means to take care of her. And I think that really touched her heart. And it's something that she has a very strong feeling about. So, on her way home from gymnastics, she's helping the homeless. And the fact that she is able to do the home, tie her respect for the military and where her brother was, where her grandfathers were, where she wanted to be, to a project that could help people. I really think there's a lot of satisfaction for her, and I think there's those are not dotted line relationships. Those are very real connections that she made.
And I can only imagine that a large part of her ability to learn that and to become that person comes a lot through what she experienced in life in your home.
Sure. Yeah. We've always made service that's part of what we do. Right. So when when our church does their Not Home Alone Thanksgiving dinner, the kids went down there and served. We went down and served the meals. That's just part of what we've always believed. And that, the respect for the military comes from both grandfathers serving during Korea, one by choice, one by invitation of the military. They've definitely seen that at home, and they've seen the respect that we've shown to the military and the empathy we've shown to people who are homeless or just struggling to, for food security or whatever the case may be. And, I have to say, I'm pleased that both of them have kind of seen that as something that they need to be a part of.
Well, it sounds like you and your wife have done a wonderful job of taking the young girl who needed a place and not only creating a place, but creating a place where you could then raise a young girl and build in empathy and love and kindness and the sorts of messages that a lot of kids don't get, even kids who are born into typically privileged American homes. And you've done a wonderful job. What's been kind of your inspiration for that over the years? Because I know that the journey is tough and it has its bumps. And so when you find those bumps, what's been the fuel to keep you going?
That's a good one. Well, my faith always plays a role in that. And, that's that's one of the bedrocks that I kind of rest on. As a parent, I guess I look back and there's the good and bad from your own life that you take with you, right? And the good you want to repeat and the bad you want to help people avoid. And that's kind of what I've, at least as a father, what I've tried to impart on my kids is, here's some things that worked well for me. And here's some, I wouldn't say regrets, but here's some things I wish I had thought of when I was your age. And to get them to think about, what is the impact on your long-term life? And what is the impact on the people around you? What you're doing, what people see and how that lands on them. That's always been a real thing. And I've tried to, as much as I can, get them to think like that. And, and to try to give them the life that I think I wish every kid could have. Not that it's full of stuff, but it's full of certainly love and certainly full of experiences. Our son was on the phone with us just this weekend. He was, he's at Power School down in Goose Creek, South Carolina. They've been locked down since he got there in November because of COVID. And they finally got out one evening this past week, and he called just to let us know, hey, I'm out with actual human beings. And he said, he goes, I've said this before, but I want to say it again. Thank you for everything you've done for me. And I'm thinking maybe he means that generically, but he said, for all the experiences you gave Katie and I, we went to the Grand Canyon, we went to Niagara Falls, we went hiking, we went whitewater rafting. And I can remember, he had said to me before, there were times when he was a kid, he didn't get a cell phone till he was in high school. And meanwhile, a bunch of his friends had iPhones when they were in grade school. And he said, it wasn't always about the stuff you gave me, but it was the opportunities you gave me. And that's something that that was always a driving motivation for me, was to give our kids, expose our kids to everything the world has to offer. And that's why Katie landed on the Air Force Academy thing, because she saw her brother showed her that was an option. And I think, and a very real option. It was possible. And that's what we've tried to impart upon her. It's like, look, it doesn't matter where you started. It matters where you end up and where you're headed. So I think I feel like I'm going around a circle on that question, but that really is, to me, it's always been about, keeping it front and center that your priority is your kids. So I'll go off on this tangent for just a second if I can. As soon as Ruth became pregnant with Noah, I realized that I was no longer the most important person in my life. And I think I see some parents who maybe might say that, but that they're maybe not committed to that idea. And maybe it's not the right idea. That's just the way I look at it. And it's not that my kids get everything, but that their well-being, their growth, physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, that's my number one priority. And that's the first question I ask on anything is, what is the impact on my kids? And I think if you kind of operate from that standpoint and not about giving your kids more stuff, but about what you're doing and how it has an impact on what they're developing into, the adults they're going to be and the lives they're going to have, I think that's a good filter and a good, it's kind of a good benchmark to use.
One of the dads groups I'm in, somebody had at one point said, put up a post that said, kids spell love differently than most of us. They spell it Time.
Yep.
And I know that's a struggle for most of us. I work a 60-hour a week job. Mm-hmm. I have 5 kids that live in my house. That's the ones that are still here, right? So we've had a couple move on, but we have a busy life. We do foster care. And we put out this podcast. I probably put 20 hours of work in a week into this as well. And our life is so busy. And I know that's one of the struggles I have, just trying to do all the things that I feel called to do and still find that time. And I'm constantly reminded of how important it is, because, that's where you build relationship where kids begin to feel safe.
I 100% agree. I can tell you, Jason, my son is 23 now, and I think I've golfed once in 23 years. And I used to golf several times a summer, whatever. And I just said, that's not that important. And I told my wife, like, we were talking about the yard, and, we've got these people in our neighborhood, the guys, that's what they do. Like, Saturday is yard work. You cut the grass, you fertilize the grass, you trim this up. And I said, listen, I'd rather be the one who's coaching my kids' baseball team or softball team than to be the one whose yard looks perfect. So my yard has looked like crap for 20 some years, but I coached my son in football. I coached him in baseball. I coached Katie in basketball. I coached her in softball. And the experiences we had there, unbelievable. My son and I went on a lot of Boy Scout camping trips with my son, and we didn't spend a lot of time together because the dads are in one spot, the boys are in another. But, just to be there and be a part of it. We did the Philmont High Adventure hike when he was about 14. And I have to tell you, Jason, I hate exercise, like, with a burning passion. My exercise passion is to not exercise.
I'm in the same club, man. I get it.
So to hike 110 miles and up a 10,000 foot mountain, with 45 pounds on your back, that was, for me, that was way out of the comfort zone, but it meant so much to him. And I share a little story. So when my son was 5 or 6, I guess 5 or 6, my alma mater's football team started to get good. And we started talking about football, and he became really interested. And we went to a game that fall. And then they ended up going to a bowl game. So we went to the bowl game in Detroit, and we had just a phenomenal experience. The next year they go to another bowl game. And I told my dad, I said, yeah, we're going to Mobile, Alabama for this bowl game. He goes, well, boy, didn't you do that already? I said, Dad, I'll tell you what, the next time my son is 7 years old and wants to spend a weekend with me, I'll do it then. Like, this is it, right? This is the chance. This is the moment. I wouldn't give up any of those experiences with them to, whether it's at a football game or, I took both my kids on a work trip when I was working for a trade association. We went to Monterey, which you and I talked about earlier. We went to the Monterey Aquarium, and, those are just I think that makes all the difference. That just makes all the difference. And this is something else I mentioned, Jason. My wife and I were talking about this quite a bit lately. So we're at the point now where, we could retire tomorrow as long as retirement lasted no more than 15 minutes. We have a habit of spending money years before we earn it. And you know what? That's okay. Because, when we took the trip to Arizona, we went as a family. We took 2 weeks. We hiked Walnut Canyon. We hiked Grand Canyon. We did a float down the Colorado River. We hiked Zion. We did it. We did it all. It happened a month after I lost my job, and we had planned this trip. And we said, "What are we going to do?" I said, "We're going. We're going to go. This is the time to do this, to have this experience. We can't wait until we have enough money to do it, because the kids aren't going to be 8 and 12 again. They're not going to be 12 and 16 again. This is the moment." And it doesn't have to be something expensive. It can just be the time thing. Could I have picked up more work? Possibly. But I guess I'd rather figure that I'd, like to your point, it's all about the time. And, we always felt that was the first priority, to spend time with them doing something meaningful. And meaningful could be, let's build one more Lego thing. And, or it could be, let's go hiking. But, I think I absolutely agree that is where it's all about the time spent.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you coming in here and telling your story. And I wish Amanda could say the same. I'm sure she would echo that, but we just had a baby show up at our house. And so she picked me for the baby. Go figure.
You'll never be first again, Jason. You're always at best second place.
Having 7 kids plus a godson. Yeah, I'm not certain exactly where I lie in that. After 7 p.m., I'm the king because they're all in bed.
Right. Well, as long as you know your role, as The Rock would say, know your role.
That's it right there, man. But I appreciate you coming in and sharing your time and your story, because it sounds like you guys have been through a lot, but you've created a lot out of what could have been otherwise just a tragedy.
Well, I appreciate the time, Jason, and Amanda, please share with Amanda as well. I appreciate you giving me a chance to talk about it, because as I said, every chance I get a chance to talk about Katie and her story or my kids, as a parent, when you get to talk about your kids, that's a good day. And I appreciate it.
Okay, Foster Care Nation, thank you for listening to Karl's story. Now take his knowledge and wisdom to heart so he can create love and healing in your family and community. Be sure to come back next week. We have new episodes every Tuesday. If you'd like to share your story as a guest, you can reach us at jason@fostercarenation.com. You can connect with the other like-minded people on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. And don't forget, we have a Patreon where you can support our mission for as little as $5 a month. It's at patreon.com/fostercarenation. The links to everything are in the show notes and on your podcast player, or at fostercarenation.com. And as always,
you are so super awesome. I think you guys are cool. Yeah. Thank you for listening.